Toggle mic. All right, my audio's on. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. So one thing that you all are going to notice that's different is that I'm not alone. And another one is that the chat is not embedded in the screen. So I just want to let everybody know ahead of time that we haven't yet figured out the technical solution that's going to let Zuzana or whoever the co-host is see the chat and be interacting with the chat. So while you all are there, I'm going to be a little bit less interactive with the chat than usual. So I just want to tell you all that. I will still interact with it, but I'm trying to do so in a way that playback will still make sense afterwards. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. And Zuzana, thank you so much for being my guest, and actually co-host, not guest. Would you just say hi and kind of tell people a little bit, just very, very, very short amount, nothing to make you uncomfortable, about who you are and kind of what brought you to this place, or what's your history with Laravel, or whatever you want to share with us before we get started.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Zuzana. What brought me here is Laravel, pretty much. So I've been wanting to get into Laravel for a while now. I worked with it a little bit last year in my old job, and I really liked it. And then I got into the community. I found out that the people in Laravel community are really nice, and it just made me want to learn it even more. But since then, I went freelance, and as a freelancer, I mainly work with WordPress, not so much Laravel. And yeah, I was looking for ways to get involved in Laravel projects. And as a freelancer, I found it difficult. And then I recently saw Matt, was it Laracom talk, was it?
I think so.
That in August. And you talked about OnRamp, so I looked into it and I joined your Telegram chat, and yep, here I am.
Yeah. So Zuzana is a capable Laravel programmer, but still learning in some ways. And so this is not someone learning from scratch. It's not as if she's never built apps in Laravel before. But every time she's been working with OnRamp, she's been really open about the fact that there's things she's still learning, and she's been very gracious to all of us to let us know when she has questions. And one of the things if you have ever checked out my YouTube channel that I talk about, is I love when people are willing to say, I don't know. And I think that that's something I really appreciate. And so we thought, why don't we try the idea of building something together and kind of see what it would look like for someone who's been using Laravel a little bit longer to work with someone who hasn't been working with Laravel quite as long, to give the opportunity for some questions to come up. And I think in future ones, we'll try and get to the point where we can involve the chat like I do in my normal streams, because we love having you all there and being chatty with the chat. But again, just technically, this first one, we're going to do it without the chat. I will, if I do see anything in the chat, I will try and read it off, and then we can respond to it. So again, you can just trust that Zuzana has not seen it and that it won't be in the playback, and I will read it to you all. So just real quick, the greeting. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you, N8UD, for following. And then everyone who said hi, thank you so much for hanging out here. And we've got at least one person here who says they're a total beginner, which is Lynx. So thank you so much. And thank you for following Skiruski. A little shack shimmy for you. So what are we doing today? We are not working on OnRamp. If anybody hasn't come to any of the other ones, we will probably make casual references to OnRamp a couple times. OnRamp is a tool that we've been building on these streams to help people join the Laravel community and become functioning, hireable Laravel programmers as quickly as possible. However, that's not what we're going to be working on, because it would be kind of hard to talk about learning Laravel from a space where we're already very deep into a pretty complicated code base. So instead, we are going to be starting from scratch with an idea that I will now pass it over to my co-host to introduce what we're building and where you think we might want to get started. Hi, friends. Hi, everybody who's joining. Okay.
So what I thought we could build, so I came up with this, well, it wasn't really me, it was my husband who came up with this idea a few years ago about building a family tree app. So to build an app where a user can sign in, create an account, manage his account or their account, and create a family tree with all the information that belongs to a family tree. So the name of a person, year and date of birth and death, and the relationship to the user. And I know there are other things out there, but for us, first of all, we want to eventually introduce the aspect of this being also available in Arabic language, because my husband comes from Jordan, and over there they are really into their family trees. They really like to study their their history, family history. So I thought one of the things I eventually would want to work on was is having this app to be in Arabic or other languages as well. And I think that this will introduce interesting aspect, like having to, because in Arabic they read from right to left. So I don't know, flipping the whole UI right to left, or I don't know. So this is something we could talk about in the future. But as a MVP something to get out quickly, or something, I don't know, like the proof of concept, would be to simply have an app where we can create users or manage users, so create and eventually delete, if they wish to, user accounts. User can create a tree, and then user can add information to the tree. So the information would at first start with the relationship to the user, so the person at the tree, so the relationship to the user, their date of birth and death, and their name. Eventually, and I think that's further on in the future, I would also like to introduce more information about the person if available, so we can kind of work on a timeline of a person. So not just knowing that this is my dad, my mom, my grandparents, but also knowing a little bit more about each of these family members. But that's, I suppose, this is something to do in the future. And yeah, I thought the user could share the tree, whether as a link or as a image. I don't know about which one, share it or export it in which format, I don't know, but I thought that would be nice as well.
Very cool. And I really appreciate the work that you put into kind of not only putting together the idea that you had, but also thinking through what it looks like, for us with 55 minutes left. What does it look like for us to begin? And this is not going to be the only time we work on this together. So hopefully every Monday for a little while, we're going to be working on this and doing it out loud, put it on Twitch and YouTube and everything. So real quick, just thank you to a whole bunch of people for following during that time that she was talking. Thidgeman, Lord Chris Ware, Joe D3V, and other folks. One of the things that Dustin LeBlanc said, says it reminds me of Keith Damiani's talk about Neo4j and graph databases. So if anybody missed it at Laracon US this year, Keith Damiani from Titan gave a talk about how graph databases work and how they're different from relational databases. This might be a really good solution for that, but we're not going to use it because it's a tech stack that is very much not beginner level, and it's also very much something that neither of us have professional level capacity with. So we're going to build this relationally. We're going to build this as simply as we possibly can, and kind of iterate from there. So I love this idea. So the simplest possible thing is going to be having a Laravel app with this name, right? So we're probably going to start there. And then you said the simplest next thing is we can create and manage users. Well, the good news is almost all of that comes out of the box in Laravel. And then when you set a tree, it seems to me like that let's say a user can potentially manage more than one tree, but within a tree, most users will only just have their own family tree, right? They're not going to be managing my tree and somebody else's tree, right?
No, but then I was thinking maybe again in the future, a user could invite a family member to contribute to the tree. So I don't know how that would work yet.
Yeah.
It would be like a super user or admin user. I don't know. But
yeah. And one of the things I asked when we were first talking about this, I says, in what way is this different from Ancestry.com? And one of the things she said was, well, and it doesn't always have to be fully different. This might be just one just for me and my family, but also the localization of a lot of those tools aren't always that great. Like getting Ancestry.com right to left instead of left to right might not be viable. So if someone's familiar with Ancestry.com and sees a lot of overlap, A, that's okay. But B, that might be an opportunity for some of y'all in the chat, especially in future times when the chat is actually on screen, to say, hey, I saw this in another app and they solved this difficult design challenge you're running into right now by doing this and that. And then that might help us, not have to make some of the complicated decisions in front of us. So Dustin said, I was hesitant to even comment because I know you don't want to work with Neo4j right now. It is totally fine, especially when the chat's on the screen, it'll be easier. But it's fine for y'all to share stuff. But we also are, just because we want to kind of keep it simple and we want to keep moving, we're always going to feel willing to just say, thanks for the idea, I'm not going to do it this time. And that's no offense to somebody's suggestion or anything like that. Thank you for following ShadDevTVV. I love pronouncing y'all's Twitch handles. Okay, so what I was thinking here is and I'm going to kind of turn this into a Matt simplified version. Matt's simplified plan for today is for there to be users and people. So users model, out of the box. We've got a people model. And as I say these things, I want you to tell me if you think this is a terrible idea, because this is your product and I'm just trying to implement it for you. Also ask me questions if I'm breezing through anything that doesn't feel super quick and easy for you. So I'm thinking maybe a people model, and the attributes we have in the person. So we definitely have name, we have date of birth, we have potential date of death, optional, but then we have to have something relationship related, which is I think where this whole thing gets complicated, because you can have any person can be related to many other people. So one of the things you mentioned was we want to know what this person's relationship to the user is. But let's say that's a great-great-great-granduncle second 2 times removed. What does it look like for us to have a match between that person not our user, but actually maybe the person below them and then next to them and then above them or whatever. And so it feels like we're going to have to build some kind of system and structure for each person to be related to many other people with types. And maybe there's like a parent type. Well, I guess it can't be a parent. So that's the thing. And that's the thing that's probably been solved before, right? Somebody has probably written up a paper somewhere about how best to build multiple levels of that stuff that you and I don't know yet. Oh my gosh, I have to pause for a second because this is not on-ramp, Duncan McLean, who's asking. Thank you for following like 10,000 people. Modestas V, Synthesis, Mario Mendoza, and Amadeus. Duncan stopped and said, is this on-ramp? And says, doesn't look like that. No, what we're building is a family tree app. And so I'll be building this app with Zuzana on Mondays, and then we'll be doing on-ramp on Fridays. So what I'm thinking is that we start by making the app, and we've got users able to log in, and we start building out the people model, and we actually put a couple like fake people into the system in our seeders. Is the stream title? I don't know how to change the stream title. Sorry, it probably says it's streaming on-ramp. John Sugar just pointed out that it says on-ramp. Okay. And then we start thinking about like maybe a few very distant and very close relationships, and how can we build the relationships between the entities in this person table such that we can actually maybe like spit them out in a page, and like we can build like a really rudimentary output. It's not going to look good, but like a box of a box, maybe just your parent, grandparent, and great-grandparent. Can we at least get those in there for starters?
Yeah.
Okay. If other than that, is there anything else that if you felt like, oh, it'd be really nice to hack on this today? Like, would you really like to look into right to left instead of left to right with Arabic, or is that something you want to push down there a little bit? Okay.
Let's get the basic one going.
Okay.
And I think the right to left, I don't know how much experience you've got with it. I don't
Zero.
know where to begin.
I have none at all.
I don't know. With right to left, do you flip the UI as well, or only? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either. I know that CSS has some basic concepts of right to left, but that's purely just about paragraph text and not UI. So yeah, I think we have some learning to do, which will be good. We might do a little bit of that learning in between them. Okay, cool. Jake is telling me how to change the title of my stream in Twitch, but the thing is that probably only changes Twitch but not Restream, but I'm just going to try it. No, wait. Jake is actually one of my admins. Jake, just tell me what to do. You have, I think you have admin permissions in my Twitch, so tell me if I need to change something. Okay, so things we're going to do right now is basically we're going to do Laravel New. We're going to get all the user and authentication stuff out of the box, which is different in Laravel 6, and so we'll both kind of learn that one together because I forgot it last time. And Jake was saying he thought he could change it, but he can't. All right, I'm gonna try it real quick and just type this thing into the Restream chat and see if it sends it correctly. And it probably won't. And if it doesn't, I'm not gonna stress out. So, okay, cool. And then we will start the model and the migration for this. And what I'm going to try and do is move slowly. And if you have any tiny questions about anything I do, you have to stop me and say, hold on, you're rushing. Tell me. I'm
actually going to use this because I wanted to point out the difference between this and the normal tutorials anyone can follow online is that when I used to do tutorials, or when I do tutorials, it's very one-sided. I just follow somebody else's instructions, and any questions I may have, either I have to stop the tutorial and go down the rabbit hole, or I just have to put them aside.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do with you, I'm going to use you pretty much, and I'm going to ask all the things I wanted to know months ago, weeks ago, and I didn't get the chance to ask. So you are in for a lot of fun.
I love it. I love it. So one thing that just came out of the chat, Emmanuel Paul said recursive nesting will help looping the family tree. And that's what I figured, is that there's going to be some kind of computer sciencey things going on there. And this will be an interesting challenge because I know a lot about Laravel, but I studied English in college. So
psychology.
Yeah, and I just put out a thing on YouTube talking about how at Titan we don't use linked lists or any of those sorts of things, so we're not really hiring for those things. So this is going to be a great time for the chat to be helpful, or for us to be doing some Googling in between them. John actually just linked to a Laravel package called Laravel Nested Set. which is basically building effective tree structures. So we may find ourselves diving into this, probably not today, but this will probably be, so we'll put this in the notes and we'll probably come back to this. Maybe we'll read it in between and then come back to it next time. So that maybe that's my homework. But let's get started with the basics. And any of y'all who are looking on the side, you can feel free to take a look at these things. And by the time we get to it today, maybe say, oh, I have a really great answer. Okay, so let's start by doing the very first basics that we do when we're building a project, which is...
Laravel and Vue.
You got it. Although I am going to cheat a little bit, and I'm actually going to go to Lambo instead. Are you familiar with Lambo at all?
I am, yeah. I've used it in the past.
Okay.
I mean, like 2 times, but I have.
Yeah. So Lambo is Laravel new. It's like the Laravel installer, but it does a few other things that I do at the beginning of every one of my projects. And so I built a little script that you can install called Lambo. And it basically does the Laravel installer and then also initializes some Git stuff. Interestingly, some of the things that it does are based on Laravel 5, and we're building a Laravel 6 app. So probably a couple of its commands are going to break. Like it runs Laravel make auth, and that's not actually how you install the authentication in Laravel anymore. So let's actually see. Let's just go to the docs right now because last time I forgot it. You basically, when you spin up a new Laravel app, you don't get... let's see, it's gonna, what do we call it? Family tree?
Yeah.
When you spin up a new app, you don't get the authentication, login and register and all that kind of stuff. And that's built out as a separate thing. And so there's this UI layer that is the login page, the register page, and all that kind of stuff that you basically have to pull in as an external package. And it's now, it didn't used to be an external package, it used to be just a command that was make auth. But now you actually...
Why it's been pulled out of the main package?
Yeah, so the main thing that Taylor said was he wanted the ability to iterate on the front end stuff and the authentication bootstrap at a different pace than the app itself. And so being tied where one has to infect the release schedule of the other felt off for him. And so he just wanted, and also I think it helped because he had gotten to the point where Samantha Geitz, former Titanite, was really pushing for us having a React one. So all of a sudden it went from there being a bootstrap to now there being a Vue bootstrap, a bootstrap, and a React bootstrap. And so at that point, when you're starting containing all that stuff within the framework itself, it started feeling like its own project. So he said, I want to pull that out. MDev83 asked, does Laravel just pump out that amazing UI by default with that .test TLD? So every new Laravel project gives you this UI for free. Putting it in .test is run by something called Valet. And Valet, basically, you park it in a certain directory. So I parked it in my sites directory. And everything that you serve, every folder within that directory gets just served at .test. So since we have a project folder that is family-tree, then you get family-tree.test.
You can change the top level directory as well in Valet. I've done it in the past. I think it's quite easy to change it. But
yeah, I think it's
in the docs.
Yeah, I think it's Valet TLD.
Yeah.
Is my guess is what it is. So you could use something other than .test, but don't use .dev anymore. It will break things for you. So what just happened? I don't know what just happened. Okay. Anyway, that was Valet. All right, so we were going to pull these in. So this is what it looks like in Laravel 6 to pull in those front-end components. So we're going to run composer require Laravel UI. We're going to pull it in as a dev dependency. And then once that's pulled in by composer, that gives us a new command called, PHP Artisan UI. And we're going to say, I want the Vue-based ones. And actually, that's a good question. What are you more comfortable with, Vue or React?
Probably Vue.
Yeah.
But I'm open to trying React as well. But do we have to use one or the other? Can we not just pull in the authentication itself?
So I believe that when you pull in the authentication, it's the same time you're pulling in all of the bootstraps that come in from all the different components. You might be able to pull in just auth and not this, but I think that it's more you pick one, Vue or React or whatever the other, there might be a bootstrap one still around, and then you can choose whether or not it will add the auth or not.
Okay.
So we're going to pick the Vue one in the auth. If you're more comfortable with Vue, Vue is, while I love React, Vue is easier for beginners in the Laravel world just because of the resources that are out there and I believe that Vue is easier for beginners anyway. I think if someone's an experienced JavaScript programmer, React will make more sense to them, but if they're a beginner in any sense, that Vue is easier. So,
okay.
So we're going to run this PHP Artisan UI. We're going to pass it the view option and then also the auth flag. And so this way, failed to open stream. Interesting. So my gut tells me that that means that npm install didn't run correctly. I also noticed an error here somewhere about npm install, which is weird because I thought that npm install was run as a part of my Lambo scripts. But again, I mentioned earlier, I have not fully updated Lambo for Laravel 6, so that might be part of the problem. So let's see.
While you're looking into it, do you have the capacity to talk as well? I don't want to over. Do you want to tell the other people about Lambo then? Because I've used it, but maybe other beginners may not know what it does.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So Lambo is a simple shell script that wraps the Laravel installer. And so first thing it does is it does Laravel new. It also changes you into the directory you just changed. It spins up a new Git repo, adds all the files, makes an initial commit, and also updates the default environment variables because the default environment variables that you get out of the box with Laravel are just things like Laravel. But if I'm making a project called Family Tree, then my database is probably going to be called Family Tree. If I'm working, Lambo assumes you're on a Mac. It assumes you have Valet running. And so on a Mac, by default, your MySQL user has the username of root. It has the empty password. And so it just basically, assuming you're on a Mac with Valet or something else that has that similar connection style, and I think Laragon would work well for it as well, it just kind of does all these basic things at the beginning of the project. It has a lot of settings, so you can do other things, like you can say what editor do you want it. It'll also like open your project up in your browser and in your editor, so you can define which editor you want to use, what the first commit message should be, and you can pass these all as flags, or you can create a single commit file or a config file that gets used by all of your future uses of Lambo. And so that config file that you create then allows you to say, I always want the React front end. I always want to secure the site afterwards. I always want to, open it in Chrome Canary instead of Chrome. And so you can kind of configure all those things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's see if we got that error again when we ran. Okay, I have not seen this before. Again, I mentioned this is new. It's saying it can't find this Sass variables .scss thing. So I might actually have to dig into this one. The interesting thing is I don't actually want this. I actually want Tailwind. So let's actually just do a... are you familiar with Tailwind at all?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay, do you like it?
I do. Actually, my website is based on Jigsaw, which is your static site generator, and I'm using Tailwinds on there as well.
All right, well, let's see if they've updated the Tailwind CSS one for Laravel 6. Yes, 21 days ago. So I'd actually much rather use this over the Bootstrap one that you get by default with Laravel. So hopefully we don't regret the work we've done so far, but we're going to follow these directions. Why is it not working? There we go. We're going to follow these directions. I don't know if it looks good to the rest of y'all, but this thing is not working. Okay, here we go. And we're going to do this. So basically, the Bootstrap CSS is what Laravel uses by default, but Bootstrap CSS is not our fave. So we're going to instead say, wait a minute, hold on, give me this Tailwind version that Michael Dorinda built out. So this is a third-party package, but it hooks into the native kind of UI tooling that Laravel uses. We might run into a problem because we're doing this and we should be in a fresh app, and instead we're doing it after I kind of flailed here a little bit. So let's just see where this treats us. All right, so PHP Artisan preset, Tailwind CSS, come on. Oh, with authentication. PHP Artisan preset, Tailwind, come on, mouse. All right, for the basic preset, auth route entry and Tailwind CSS auth views in one go. Okay, so what this is basically telling us is if you want the generated basic default Tailwind templates, so all the templates that Laravel comes with out of the box, the only thing this third-party thing is doing for us is doing it with Tailwind instead of Bootstrap. In theory, we'll do this. And if this all breaks, then we'll just basically kick out of here and Lambo it again. Exactly. Yeah. Actually, let's just go see. Can we... yeah, so I believe that these changes are all the changes that were made by us trying to install the Vue thing. So I'm a little nervous about running this on here. Let me just try something. I don't have a quick alias. So Nerdroid23 says you could run the get alias to remove everything. There's a get alias for getting rid of all the untracked files, but I don't actually have that one handy, and I'm trying to remember what the easiest way to do that. I mean, I can get rid of all of them one by one, but oh, you know what? All right, let's do a quick sensor, and I'm going to switch over to GitHub Desktop. I'm going to add this app that we're working on to GitHub Desktop, and then GitHub Desktop has a really quick UI for getting rid of those files. So meanwhile, somebody will probably write, yep, there you go. Check it out. Multiple people giving us, Jake Bathman and Dustin LeBlanc both gave us 2 different syntaxes that we could potentially use to delete all of those files. Who knows which one's actually correct, or whether they're both are correct or neither, just for fun. So I'm going to go the GitHub Desktop way only because I want this to be as beginner-friendly as possible. So, we got a third option from Michael Deck. Okay, so I'm going to put you all back on the screen, and you can now see this. So with the GitHub UI desktop UI, you can just say discard these changes. So what we're doing right now is basically going back to that initial commit that Lambo runs right after we ran Laravel Vue. And so what we're going to do, once again, is we're going to go back here, and we are going to pull in the Laravel frontend presets Tailwind version, and then we're going to run that. Thank you, everybody, for all those answers, even though I ignored all of them and used the user interface anyway. All right, so far I know that this is in your wheelhouse, Zuzana, and you're feeling pretty good about it. Have you ever had any questions about what this this process with the auth looks like, or is this pretty clear from jump about what this is doing for us?
I was okay with this part. If you want to try to explain for other people, but because I also read the Laravel docs, and it's quite straightforward, and also it never failed, so I never had to debug it. So that's the reason why I'm okay with it, because I never had any problems with it. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that's fine. I don't think there's any reason why, especially when you're that early on, right? And that's one of the wonders of Git, right? If something breaks, and it breaks in a way where you say, well, hold on, that wasn't what I want to do in the first place. We could have spent a whole bunch of time debugging that whole SaaS thing, but in the end, we're like, wait a minute, that's not actually what we want to work with, so why would we even worry about that anyway? And so we just kind of just said, you know what, just get out of here. Okay, so what I was doing here is, so we're running npm install and npm run dev. I'm going to do another sensor real quick so I can pull it up in the in our SQL client. So let's do that real quick. I'm using Table Plus these days, so I'm going to spin that up, and we're going to make a new database, because that's one thing that it doesn't do, that Valet and Lambo don't do for you, is create a new database. So we're going to make this database name family tree with underscores, because sometimes dashes break.
Yeah, that's a question, because I normally use dashes, so you wouldn't recommend using dashes?
So interestingly, you saw, everyone else couldn't see, that I have dashes in a lot of the other ones on this machine, but there's some context in which dashes break. So if anybody knows, I would love to hear from y'all. When are dashes okay and when are dashes not okay in SQL? But basically, it's one of those ones where I've done it enough times that I know it's possible, but it's broken before, and I don't know which context it breaks in or not. So I would say that if you remember this, just remember to not use dashes.
Okay.
So I'm going to replace it there. So our .env, and actually, one of the things that Lambo does is it fixes our .env.example also, so that when other people work with us in the future, they'll also get a correctly generated one that's really ready for local work on this. But I had to change it in both places. Dustin LeBlanc says, I always use a snake case, so meaning underscores out of fear. So I'm not the only one who has that vague fear that they're not totally sure about. All right, so we've got a database here, and so one of the next things that this preset says is run php artisan migrate, which will basically take all the tables that we have by default and we'll create them, and then we don't need this because we're running Valet. So let's just run php artisan migrate right now. And see, okay. So by default with Laravel, we get a users table, a passwords reset table, and then a failed jobs table that we don't need to think about right now. So really, these two allow us to have users that can log in, have passwords, register, all that kind of stuff. Adam Culp says, can databases have dashes but not table names? That might be the case. Then he runs to test. Okay, so in theory, we should have this right now. So let's see. There we go. So you noticed it changed a little bit because we switched over to Tailwind instead of Bootstrap, but it's the same basic thing. But now that we've got this auth, we can theoretically register and log in. And I'm pretty sure that was actually the first thing that you had on your list, which was Laravel New, and then add Tailwind and add basic user registration and login. So while it took us a minute to do that because of kind of fussing through this brand new Laravel 6 stuff, getting that user registration and login was really, really, really quick. Nope. All right, so we log in, we've got a password, we're logged in, and that's it. Okay, so what's next on our list?
Now create the person.
Yeah, okay.
So create a tree, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we were talking about is, can we get, one question I'll ask you is, can we get away with every person only having a single tree and other people contributing to that tree later being a new concept? Where this basically it's one person's tree, or do you think it would make more sense? Thanks, John. John says checking the auth stuff. Do you think it would make more sense for us to start out of the box with each person having a tree named after them, and then they can create multiple trees? So here's the benefit of each person being able to interact with multiple trees is because it makes more sense that it's a named tree. The downside is I remember working with Ancestry.com, and one of the things I think about is I'm connected with one side of my dad's family because they have someone there who's super, super, super connected. And technically that person's tree, that person who's put all that work in, is technically part of my tree, right? Because those people are all on that one piece. So trees kind of connect to each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So to me...
Like everyone's got their own branch, and eventually...
exactly.
Child, yeah.
So the question for us is going to be, what is the logic, probably later, that defines who gets access to who else's entered data, right? There's going to be some linking form. And I guess it kind of makes sense that by doing that, there's going to be some element of either I have access to your entire tree because we've decided we're related or whatever, or some other way of I have access to your tree, but only the ones that are connected to this. And so I don't know if we've figured that concept out. So I'm kind of thinking out loud, wondering whether our better option is to go for the simpler option now or not, because that's going to bite us later. Let's go for the one that made sense to you, because I don't have an answer, and in your brain it really makes sense to have a tree. So let's make an object called tree, and later if we want to rework that, we can. Amdev83 says, drop the link to the GitHub repo whenever you get a chance, please. We will. There's no repo right now. I said I was going to push it up to mine, but actually I think we're just going to push it up directly to yours after the call, if that's something you want to do. So, all right. But real quick, John mentioned, remember to commit this. So yeah, so we want to see what have we done here. And this is basically just all the impact of the auth routes. And so we're just going to say add Tailwind and auth. And then we're also going to, oh no, where's my co-committer? There's supposed to be a little icon down here that lets me add a co-author. It's grayed out. Why do I not have the ability to do a co-author? Oh, you may not be able to co-author until you actually have a remote on GitHub. Well, boo. What's your ZK4 something?
433.
433, like that?
And I now really regret using this everywhere.
You can always change it.
Well, no, you can, because I think I read if you change it, at least on Twitter, then this becomes available to anyone else.
So here's what you can do. Change it, and then instantly go sign up for that same one with some other throwaway email address.
Okay.
Dustin says maybe the co-author works after it's pushed to GitHub, and I think that's actually exactly what it is. So.
Okay, I'll have to think of it. Yeah.
All right. So what we need to do is make a model and a migration, so a table for a tree. So is that something super familiar? If I were to do this, make model, tree, migration, is there anything in there that's a question for you?
Nope.
Cool. So for anybody else, we're making a new model. A model is the PHP class in Eloquent that interacts with the database. And then the migration is the thing that creates or modifies or deletes database tables. And so we're both creating a model named tree, but then we're also going to create a migration that will be pre-filled with information around something named tree. So it'll make the whole process easier for us.
Why don't you do the controller as well? Because we eventually...
Go ahead, yeah. Yeah. So one of the questions is why would we not create? So you can also create a resourceful controller that has list all trees, create tree, edit tree, show tree out of the box. So there's a good reason for that, which is that you have to think about that less. The thing for me is that we have a little bit of a conversation going on the internet about all applications are just CRUD. CRUD meaning create, read, update, delete. And no matter how fancy and complicated your web application is, in the end, it's just a CRUD app. And in some ways, that's true. However, one of the things I've found is that if I lean too heavily into that idea, like the first view I build and everything is just the CRUD views for those, then I find myself thinking less about the user experience and more just being in programmer mode where I just build table after table after table, forms and tables, forms and tables, forms and tables. So it's always a balance. Everything is CRUD. And yet I also want to say, like, when somebody first logs into this website, is anybody going to want to see a list of all the trees? No. The first person who logs in, the first thing they're going to do is going to add people. So this trees is more of a background concept, right? Only admins will care about that off the bat. So I think that when we talk about people, we probably want to create the controller as we go. With trees, not so much. Does that make sense, the distinction?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And Jonas Erlandson just said, if you do -mf, you get the migration and the factory at the same time, which I didn't know. That's actually really fun. So let's actually go try that out because that's an even cleaner one. Because one of the first things we would have done right after this was go create the factory. So this would have been a great time for us to remember what the syntax was that everybody said about discarding things, but instead we're just going to discard it in the UI. So we're going to try that again. So artisan make model tree. So you'll notice that when you do in bash scripts, you do 2, it's usually the longer one, and you do 1, it's usually a shorter one. So that's
really interesting. It would make sense if you already have a shorter, like just one letter, then it just makes less sense. Why have 2 dashes in the longer version and 1 dash in the shorter one? Usually
because it's easier for your brain to remember, and or it's easier for it to show other people. I mean, for me at least. So for example, I use -- migration usually because I'm teaching. So where I might do -mf on my own, that's one more shortcut that other people have to remember. And if anybody's seen me live streaming, and Zuzana, I know you have, I have a lot of little shortcuts that I have built for Git that I have to remember to not use, because when you're trying to pair with somebody and they don't know those, using those basically means that they're not learning the process as they go.
Okay.
All right. As Podlagar, Sam says, hey, Matt, I missed the beginning. Could you give a quick explanation of what you're doing this stream? So on Mondays, Zuzana and I are going to be working together to build a family tree app. And somebody's actually explaining in the comments. But we're building a family tree app, and the simplest thing we're going to do right now is allow a user to log in and add the people in their tree. All right, so -mf, what I was saying is -mf is the one that Jonas told us, which is almost definitely going to be -- migration -- factory. So I'm just going to write that out and see. There we go. Cool. And those are things you always need with every model. You need a migration and you need a factory. You don't technically need a factory, but if you're going to be doing any testing or anything, you definitely want to have it.
Can you talk about the factory a little bit more? Because normally, if I think of other tutorials, it all usually ends at migration, model control migration. That's sort of, the basic package. So what is a factory?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of different contexts that you might want to create a fake tree. The 2 most common contexts are when you're seeding a new install. Seeding meaning I just spun up this app and there's no data in it. How do I get good data that makes it easy for me to use it or understand it? And so seeds help you fill out the data with a brand new app. And then tests, you usually want to use fake data to run tests against. So one common test might be create 2 users and have user 1 create the tree, assert that user 2 can't see user 1's tree. Right? So you might run a test around access. Factories make it really easy for you to build robust fake trees in your tests in a single line, saying, hey, factory, give me a tree, rather than building much more complicated ones. Excuse me. I thought I turned everything on mute, but I did not. Okay, back to mute. So that's the benefit of factories. So factories are... sometimes they feel like a little bit of a pain in the butt to spin up in the beginning, but having factories accessible is one of the things that helps us make really good decisions. Like when you have a factory, you're not tempted to use production data in local. When you have a factory, you're less lazy with writing good tests because it's so easy to spin it up. And so those are the types of conveniences where when you make them out of the bat, even when you don't know off the bat, even know when you're going to use them, they make your writing good code process, better later.
Do you have one factory per app or per model?
Yeah. So in old Laravel, there was one model factory. So in old Laravel, there was no package for it. And then Jeffrey Way made one, and I think Adam Wathan made one as well. And then eventually factories became a part of Laravel and it was all one big file. But I think 2 or 3 versions ago, and in late 5 dot something, there are now the patterns of having a factory per model. So as you can see here, we've got tree factory, which is going to be factory just for the tree class. And when you make a factory, you say PHP artisan make : factory and then pass the name of it. You could theoretically just make one, but it's been made so easy to make a factory per model that's kind of the canonical way to think about it now.
Okay.
All right, don't forget the Xmas trees, Stauffer Klaus. I'm not sure what that means, but I love Christmas, and so I'll take it. And then John Sugar also says factories and Tinker as well. So if you're ever working with Tinker, which is the REPL that allows you to basically pull stuff like, for example, users equals user all. If you're ever doing stuff, so that threw an error of some sort. But if you're ever doing stuff in Tinker where you're really quickly playing around with making a new fake one to create something, you can say user equals factory user class create, and now you basically have a user to play around with. And so Tinker is a place where we often try new things out to tinker around with them, and factories are very useful there as well. So this means we have an error somewhere in our code, but it's okay. We haven't actually started building our code, and that's why it quit out when we did this. All right, so to our trees. So by default, when we're building this migration, we get a auto-incrementing ID and then a created at and an updated at. So the question for us is, what other things do you want to think about on a tree?
Now, are we thinking about the tree or what the tree will contain? So we're not talking about people that will be part of the tree. We only talk about the tree itself, right?
Yeah, just the tree, nothing within it.
Well, I can think of so from a user's perspective, so imagine I'm the user and I want to create a tree. So what we mentioned earlier, so can one user have more than one tree? Or can they create more than one tree? Or can they can be part of more than one tree because of all the family members and relationships. But would they want to create more than one tree?
Yeah, my gut says no. My gut says that each person is going to manage only their own tree. And not only that, but because of the example I gave earlier, where I have my family on Ancestry.com, but then my family is connected to someone, there's really only going to be one giant tree. So the big question for us is, in the end, trees probably will not exist as a concept, because it's probably going to be one giant interwoven thing where some people connect and some people don't connect. But we're going to have some way to figure out how, and that's the thing with my family is the best example. I know this thing about this part of my family, but this part of my family right here, I got to make sure this right here is my father's father, and I know this other guy who is related to this family, and he's got this whole tree here. And so is that a boundary between two trees, or is this just really one giant tree and each of us has, circles that we have access to? So my gut says the simplest version we build right now treats these as two entirely different things for now. And then we're going to probably at some point recognize that when we start allowing multiple people to work on overlapping pieces of trees, that's when we're going to blow away the concept of tree and instead build a more robust concept of access and permissions. Does that sound good?
Okay. Sounds complicated, but yeah.
Well, I mean, but remember, this is learning Laravel. So if I'm being too complicated or too hand-wavy, you got to stop me and tell me, hey, wait a minute, explain the thing.
Yeah, well, the thing is, part of my struggles is that when it comes to building an app, there's so much I don't know that needs doing. I just don't know the things that I will have to think about in the future. And I think that's the same case for other beginners. Like, there's just so much to think about. And there is no list for, that you have to follow.
Yeah.
There is no tutorial for that. So I think it sounds complex now because I don't understand all the pieces that's going to be involved, but I'll get there eventually. And I think you trying to explain it to me right now, it won't make much sense. So let's just, we'll get there eventually. Okay.
Well, I would say that, and I appreciate that. Say the simplest way for us to think about it is trees don't overlap. In our immediate dumb world, there's a tree and there's another tree, and they might contain the same people, but in our world, they will be different. And later, we'll handle overlaps and access and permissions.
Yes.
All right, so real quick, I'm going to go through a couple notes that came from the chat. So Adam Culpa came back later and said, MySQL objects should stick to ignoring dashes unless you intend to always put single quotes around them in your queries. Underscores don't have this limitation. So it's probably likely that if you're using Eloquent, dashes are fine. but it's just like an old school thing. If you use underscores, you're safer. And then Emmanuel, Paul, and John and Adam were all talking about how nodes and trees all interact with each other, and basically continuing to think about some of the things we're thinking about. In the end, it is if one person exists in multiple trees, then that's where we have these questions. And I would just say, let's just build it for now and answer that question when we get to it. So for all the reasons you just said. So right now,
if you think I'm wrong, like tell me, because
I will. So I think that in the end, individual trees won't be the best solution. However, I think it is a very good solution for right now. And the good thing is with programming, you can always change things later. Thank you for subscribing, Matt J. Sorensen. So I would just say, we don't need to worry about it. So Xander Smallbill says, I think that there's other data structures that will suit this use case better, like graphs and nodes. And you might not have been here earlier, but we actually somebody mentioned the idea of graph databases. And I said, I agree. I think a graph database, and again, anyone who hasn't checked it out, go look at Keith Damiani's talk at Laracon US. Graph databases make a ton more sense for this. However, we're going to try and keep this as simple as possible, and that's not simple. So while we might be killing ourselves a little bit using relational databases and recursive nesting and stuff like that for this, the goal right now is to try and keep it as simple as possible to have a good learning experience and still build something somewhat useful. If this were going to be the next Ancestry.com, then we might want to make one of those tech decisions earlier. But because it's not, I think we're okay to just start building the thing out and seeing kind of where it takes us. Does that sound good to you? Go ahead.
Yeah, is it possible to change the database later on?
Yeah, it is possible. I think the big question would be, with any of these discussions, my inclination is always to say, allow yourself to make the change later. With this one, this is sort of the heart of the app. And so changing it later will have implications. That said, it's not as if we're going to be building an extremely complicated app before we hit the point where we might say, you know what, in order for this thing to go forward really well, it would need that change made. So I would not say someone building an actual live production software as a service that they want to charge people money for, if they know that within a couple months they're going to have to change databases, like as significantly as the change from a relational database to a graph database, I would say start in the graph database. But that's not this circumstance. And I do think that making that change later in the context we're talking about right now, where it's all about learning and exploring and also just figuring out what the app's going to do as we go, we are going to keep the database architecture and the code that hits the database simple enough that we're going to be doing lots of other things like building out user interfaces and figuring out how right to left works and all that kind of stuff, such that probably not 6 months down the road, you're going to want to pull out relational and switch to graph. But I think you got some time. So, and again, if we weren't in a learning context, we might make the decision a little bit differently. So,
yeah.
All right. Oh, and Dustin LeBlanc says, would migrating data be an issue later? And that's exactly it. If we were storing like final users' production data in a relational database right now, we could certainly always put it in a graph database later, but it would be a lot of work. So, but the thing is, we're not. Right now, we're building a lot of fake data and just kind of learning how Laravel works and thinking through interfaces and stuff like that, and that's it. So, all right, so we have about 15 minutes left. So what I think would be cool is if we could finish this trees model and table and then the people model and table. Just get them kind of stubbed out and maybe related to each other, and then start thinking about what we will pick up next week. So we mentioned that every tree is going to belong to a person. So belong to a person. Do you think the idea of even naming a tree matters, or at this point it's really just going to be Zuzana's tree?
I think from a user experience perspective, people might want to name their trees.
Okay.
But for now, will be again difficult to change it later on. I mean, if it's easy to implement now, I would just allow the user to name the tree. Okay.
All right. So we're going to make a string for name, and then we're going to make a all right, so it's unsigned, oh man, what is it? Unsigned big integer, I think it is. And this is going to be a foreign key for the user. And then we're also going to say table, oh man, so Taylor just introduced a new syntax for how foreign key relationships are going to work, but it's not in Laravel yet. So we want what's the foreign key syntax? Do you know off the top of your head?
You're asking me? No,
yeah.
Hold on, I can Google it.
There's it's reference foreign. That's what it is. What's that? Sorry.
To talk about Do you want to talk about what foreign keys are a little bit? Because this was one thing I was confused about early on.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I got it now, but...
Okay, so what we did here was we basically said, first of all, there's a column in this table called user ID. And that's usually the convention for doing it is it's the singular version of the table you're referring to. Thank you for subscribing, Jimmy R32. Dustin, thank you for the late response. I'm going to just blame the lag for that. So when you're thinking about foreign keys, you're always in Laravel at least going to be referencing the ID column. And the ID column is going to be on another table. And that's how foreign keys work. Foreign keys are basically... so if you imagine that every table has like a primary column that is the column that identifies, there's a unique ID for every entry in that database table, and that is the key. And so it's called the primary. In Laravel, it's called big increments, which combines the fact that it's a big int instead of a normal int, which means it can contain more numbers. Increments, which means it's auto-incrementing. And so each one will automatically be assigned an ID one higher. And then it's also the primary key. And so we've told this database that this table should be primarily functionally indexed by this. So if somebody else wants to say, I want to be related to that user, and the user has a primary key called ID, then this one, trees, needs to point to that user by pointing to that user ID. And so we've created a column on trees called user ID that says, hey, this tree should be related to one user, and the user is identified by the entry in this column. Yeah. So that's the basics. What we did here was we now also taught MySQL specifically. We're adding an index called or on the user ID column and saying it is a foreign key that references the ID column on the user's table. So this right here is really more just a convention, but this right here actually strictly connected this tree entry to that user entry. And when you're doing these foreign key references, the first thing it does is it makes sure that if there's no user with an ID of 50, you can't add a tree with a user ID of 50. But additionally, you can add other things here, like what happens when somebody deletes that user. If a tree belongs to a user and the user's deleted, what happens? And so by default, it will say, you can't do that because you didn't delete that user's tree yet. But if you want to, then you can do something like on Cascade.
Cascade, I think I've heard of Cascade, yeah.
And Cascade basically says, or I think it's on delete Cascade is what the syntax is in Laravel. We'll look it up in a second. And so what Cascade does is basically says, if I delete the user, then all the things that are foreign key related to that user should also be deleted. Amdev83 says this is a one-to-one relationship between user and tree. It's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many, because we could have 3 trees that all have the user ID of 1, and so that user 1 would now have 3 trees. And I think it's, here you go, on delete Cascade. And this is an example right from the docs. So you have a foreign pointing to the user ID. It references the ID column in the user's table. And then when you delete the user, also delete the tree or whatever that they're related to. So Sam Podlegar says on delete Cascade. Thanks. Hey, I am Digia. Does soft deleting alter that Cascade functionality? Sort of. That you don't get Cascade soft deletes out of the box, I don't believe, but that's a topic for a day when we have more than 7 minutes left. But great question, Dustin. Yeah, I think we're gonna hold off on that one. So how does this feel? Does it feel pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's real quick go make the tree factory. So how familiar are you with factories?
Not very.
Okay.
I mean, I've done it because I followed a tutorial, but yeah.
Yeah, let's walk.
I wouldn't be able to do it just out of, without help.
So a factory is defining to this system, if I am going to create one of these, what do I need to know to create it? So really the only unique thing that we built on this is the name. Everything else relates to other things, but we do have a user ID. So let's say the things we're going to need to define to create a tree is a name and a user ID. So in theory, we could just hard code this. We could just say the name is always going to be, Bob Tree, and the user ID is always going to be 1. And in theory, this would work. So if we were to go into our system right now, and we would say tree equals factory tree class create. Actually, just make it instead of saving it to the database. What is going on, y'all? Why am I... You shouldn't have to use app / because Tinker's supposed to be smart enough for that. We might have to go look at the logs to figure out what's going on here. Okay. So debugging. Debugging is one of the most important things to learn how to do as you're programming, and thankfully live coding gives you lots of opportunity for learning how to debug. So in Laravel by default, you have the storage / logs directory, and you get all of your logs echoed out to Laravel -year-month -day.log. So you're going to do tail-f and then that thing. So tail is a Linux command that basically just says, give me a little bit of that file. But if you do tail-f, instead of just outputting a little bit of that file, you're actually going to follow along with that file as the changes are made. So if you just go here real quick, when you run this again, I'm imagining, although I'm not 100% sure, that we will get some kind of error. And if not, then it'll be harder to debug. But hopefully we'll get something out of there. Wow. I don't know what's going on with Tinker, y'all. This is something else. Real quick, I'm going to look at the chat to see if we got any good answers there. People are talking about soft deletes. Okay, yeah, so they're not talking about this. All right, so I'm not sure what's going on with Tinker. I'm not going to waste 4 more minutes on hacking on that. But if we were to go in and basically say, I want an instance of a tree, you'd say tree factory, and then you'd pass in either this app tree, like that, and then you'd say create. And if you say create, it saves it to the database, and if you make, it doesn't save it to the database yet. Yeah. What we do is instead of passing in a string, we pass in this : class, which basically gives you that exact same string, but in a little bit more programmatic way. Does Tinker have a -v? I don't think so. -v would normally make it more verbose, but the problem that we're running into is it's erroring out with a failure. But let's just try it out. Yeah, I don't know what that error is, but we can hack on that a little bit later. Okay, so basically what this is saying is if we were to do this, then the tree we would end up with would have a name of Bob tree and a user ID of 1 every time, which is not all that useful. So factories come with Faker, which is a library that allows it to be really simple to generate fake stuff. And so there's one called name. So now every time we generate one, we're going to get a different name. User ID is where things get a little bit more complicated. So one of the things we used to do a lot in the past is pass it a closure. And then in the closure, we would create a user. And so you'd basically say something like this, like return factory user class create. So you'd create a user and then you pass in the ID. There are cleaner ways to do that Laravel has recently introduced that we can cover next time. But I just want to introduce this basic idea that basically says, right now what this is going to do is if I ask for a new tree, it will get a new name from Faker, and then if I don't tell it what user ID to use, it will then run this closure, it will create a user, and then it'll pass me back the ID for that user. And one of the cool things about that is if I do know the user I want this to be generated to, I can pass in this user ID, and then it doesn't even run this closure at all, so we're not generating a whole bunch of extra users. And so that would look like this. Tree equals factory, tree class, create. But when we're saying create, we now pass the things that we want to customize in. And so we could also customize the name if we want, best name. We can type it correctly, and then we can say user ID. And let's say we were in a context right now where we already had a user. Well, then we can already grab that user's ID. And so in this case, well, in this particular factory, you don't even need a factory because we literally just customize both of them. But one of the cool things that factories let you do is customize just one of them. So you can say something like that. So factories make it very easy, even when you're customizing one factor or another, to make these. Now, you wouldn't use factories as a part of normal coding because you don't want a user to sign up and all of a sudden get a Faker generated name. But for testing and all that kind of stuff, it can make life much easier. So real quick, I just want to open up the app again and see, are we getting any errors? No, we're not getting any errors. So I have no idea why we're getting Tinker errors. I'll have to diagnose that one later. So, okay. So are you okay with creating a person really quickly?
Do we have time? We've got 1 minute left.
We probably won't finish it, but we can start it. You want to?
Okay.
So only because I think that there's going to be some thinking to do there. So we're going to say make model person migration factory, and I think it's controller. Actually, hold on. Let's commit that real quick. So what do we do? Create tree model and migration and factory. And then we'll do this. Interestingly, John Sugar said I've also had problems with Tinker in PHP 7.3. I fixed it with adding a file to the root of your project, which we'll take a look at later. All right, so let's look at what we got with this real quick. We're not going to be able to build the people factory out the whole way, but just like last time, we've got a people factory, person factory. We've got a person class, or a person model, and then we've got this create people table. And then we could go in here and we basically know there's going to be a name.
Yep.
And then we know there's going to be a
date of birth.
Date of birth. Can't remember this. Is this also? Geez, I haven't dealt with multi. I guess we kind of have to make both of these, or nullable. I mean, not optional.
Mm.
I'm just trying to remember the dashes versus underscores in column names. I've gotten all mixed up now. So in theory, we might add somebody not know their date of birth. And in theory, someone might not be dead. And so we need those to be nullable. And then, of course, there is the whole relationships, which we haven't figured out yet. So that's for next time. And then in the factory later, we can add their name. And we can add date of birth. And then Faker's got one for that, date of death. And then this, so this you're going to want, interestingly, you want some of them to be null. So you're going to have to do something that says sometimes give me a null and sometimes give me a correctly formatted date. So we'll have to deal with those later. And then we'll also want to cast our dates here as well. So, yep, okay, cool. So yeah, so that's kind of where we are left off today. So let's go take some really quick notes about what we've done. So we create a tree, table, migration, and factory. And then created a person, migration, factory, model, and controller, which we didn't look at. Let's go look at it real quick. Person, controller. So that's it. It's just a controller, nothing else.
Yep.
And great. So things to do later. So we said build out person, or at least the first round of person relationships. Thank you for subscribing, Febri Perdana. Build functioning factory for people. And then probably build out basic people controller methods. So that's kind of what we have that are obvious to-dos left over from the coding we were doing. But let's talk about, from your context, from the product owner context, what are the next things you want to do? So let's say we get done and we have a technically functioning database tables for people that are related to other people and the ability to create a person and see a list of all the people in the table. That's not that actually satisfying. So what's our next actual kind of goal for the user to be able to do? Let's say they added their grandmother and grandfather and then their great-grandparents. What do they want out of that?
See them on the screen, so we need to work on the views.
Yep, okay. So see basic tree layout.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to be pretty complicated. So it's going to be interesting because we're going to have to basically build the, and but it's obviously with a family tree. If you can't do a family tree, then what are you even doing? So you got to be able to kind of put that on there. So, okay. So between now and next week, we are going to push this repo up and make it public so anybody can see it. We are going to push this. I'm going to edit this and I'm going to push it over to YouTube and we'll tweet it out so everyone can watch it later and share it with people. We're going to dig into this nested set stuff a little bit to see if there's some learning we can do there about how to build out these people relationships because it's obviously one of the most complicated things. Thanks for following BECEGM3. And then we're going to start thinking about what this basic tree layout is going to look like. And obviously we all think about the simplest family tree as, me in a bubble and then lines. But turns out those sorts of things are actually pretty complicated to build in HTML. And we may find that we want to do a little bit of research JavaScript-based tree drawing solutions. We may find that it's actually more worth our time to just find somebody who's made a pre-made family tree type thing, or a relational tree or nested tree or whatever thing, and don't even worry about building it in Blade, because this is something that's not like drawing lines between things that go up and down and zoom in and out. Blade and generic HTML and CSS aren't really well suited for that, so it's probably not even worth our time. So once we get the data structured well, we're going to learn about pulling in JavaScript and building little internal APIs and lots of really fun challenges there. So
yeah.
So I talked a lot today. You had really fantastic questions and brought a really great challenge to us. Are there questions that you want to ask coming out of this, or things you want to teach people about of your knowledge coming out of this, or things you want to put on our things to do later queue that we haven't gotten to?
Well, to do later, what I thought eventually, I remember seeing a website somewhere when you can zoom into a picture and you get, like, as you zoom in, you get more information.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea how they've done it, but it was done. So that would be nice in the future, sometime in the future. So you can see the bigger tree as you zoom in, but that's more to do with the design.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as much as in functionality, I think. But it's something that would be nice.
Okay.
When it comes to this, there's a lot to think about. I think the biggest takeaway for me is knowing how much is involved in even planning an app.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think this is something, when beginners just follow tutorials, the thinking stage has been done for them. They don't have to worry about it. They just follow somebody else's plan. So knowing what is involved, this is, I think, half of the struggle. This is, knowing, once you know things that you need to think about, you are halfway there in a way.
Yeah.
So that's, for me, it has been great to see and to hear you thinking through these things. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's fun because you're both technical and also learning technically, but you're also the product owner. You have a much better idea about what this should work like than I do, and so you're not just the learner. You both already know Laravel more than someone who's brand new at, and you know more about the product than I do, and so I think that helps kind of keep the dynamics interesting. And so you tell me how you want it to work, and so that. But I love what you said.
How it can work.
Yeah, that's true. But that's also a normal part of the relationship of saying I want this, and saying, well, that would take us 3 years. What about 80% of that we can do in 2 weeks or something like that? So. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me, co-host. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out in the chat, both of you who added things to the chat and also those of you who just hung out and watched it. So, again, we'll put links to all this later. And in theory, probably next week, same time, but I'll make sure we tweet it out beforehand, and hope to see you all next time.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next time.
Bye.
Yes, thanks, Jakes. Follow us on it later. I will make all the notes public in the YouTube descriptions, and I'll tweet out a link to it later as well.
Okay.